Hey friends, I'm so happy that you're here this week to hang out. This is going to be a really great episode. Now, before we get to that, we're just a few days away from the National Apartment Association's huge expo and conference in Philly. And I'd love to meet you because as much as I love being on this side of the mic, nothing beats that face-to-face interaction of getting to meet people from our Sprout community or from the multifamily mix community. So many of you tune in and listen in, but I'd love to connect with you in person. So come and see us. We'll be at booth 1065. Now, if you've been to NAA or you haven't, one thing to note is the expo is humongous. So we're just a tiny 10 by 10 booth. It's easy to kind of fade in, but I want you to make it on your calendar to say, I'm going to come by booth 1065. We're going to have the most beautiful photo booth opportunity. You're going to want to get your picture taken. It's very Sprout and Garden-like, and our Sprout team will be there handing out swag. We've got some great stickers and some other fun things. So make sure to add us to your agenda, booth 1065. So let's talk about today. This episode is just so important. You know, where we're at in the industry, we know that focusing on resident retention has never been more important. I think I've mentioned the stat, but $7,600 is the average turnover cost. So anything that we can do to lessen that burden and to keep the residents that we have is going to be so critical. So let's rewind. A few months ago, you guys know that Marcy and I were at the Napa, the social media conference that they had in Napa, and it was an incredible whirlwind of an experience. It was my first time attending. Now, I loved a lot of the sessions, but there was one session that had me literally scribbling notes like crazy. And as soon as the session was over, I was like, I am going to LinkedIn message and just shoot my shot to the speaker because this was such a good conversation. So I messaged Priyanka, who is our guest today, and I said, I would love for you to come and just share this wisdom all about reviews and reputation currency with our audience. And she agreed, and she's phenomenal. So I thought she was great on stage, but one-on-one, the conversation just flowed. Now, what I love about Priyanka is it's all very practical. It's very doable. Like she takes the bar, and even though we're delivering some really cool experiences, it's strategies that absolutely anyone can implement. So who is my guest? So my guest is Priyanka. I'm going to make sure Agarwal. I think I might have pronounced it wrong when I first said hello. She is an online reputation expert. She's a PR entrepreneur. She has an incredible nonprofit. I'm going to put all of that into the blog because her nonprofit includes music and animals, and it's something that she's undertaken with her son. So I'm so excited about supporting that. She's also a public speaker, a blogger. She just does it all. She is an incredible resource in our industry. And in fact, she is the director of public relations for J. Turner. So you guys are familiar with J. Turner. They provide such incredible data on what is happening in our industry. And for this specific session, she's talking all about reputation currency, how it affects your reviews, practical things that we can do to increase those positive reviews, and then what to do when the wheels fall off, because we've all had that. So without further ado, I think it's time for you guys to meet my now friend, Priyanka, and hear this incredible conversation all about reputation currency. I'm so thankful that you've agreed to be on the podcast and share your knowledge with my audience today. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. I feel so honored that you've asked me to be on it.
Well, you know, I was sharing with my team that out of all the sessions, I mean, I loved a lot at the social media summit, but your session, I messaged you this, was just my absolute favorite because so much rang true for our teams and our on-site teams. And, you know, we get sometimes lost in the shuffle of everything technology and all of these things, but the principles that you were talking about, they seem like they're enduring principles and they're all about people and connection. And I love that. So I was hoping today, you mentioned a term that I was fascinated by, which is reputation currency. Could you explain to our audience a little bit, what does that mean?
Sure, absolutely. But, before we really get into a definition, let me set some context here. So, what's happened is in our industry, I think for whatever reason, we've just been so conditioned to think about reputation in terms of 4-star reviews and 5-star reviews. We're just so laser focused on that we've lost track of the 3 core building blocks, which are safety, support, and enjoyment of any home. What happens is when a resident decides to live or is looking at an apartment community, they're essentially asking three questions. The first question is, am I going to be safe living here? Is my environment clean, well maintained, hygienic? Are me and my family going to be safe here without any utility issues? The second one is the property going to support me? Are they going to be there to return my phone calls, my emails, attend to my work orders, or if there is an emergency? Or are they even going to support me when I don't directly ask for support, right? Maybe I'm going through some kind of a personal crisis. And the third pillar is really enjoyment, which is related to, do the property teams really treat me as an individual? Do they know me by name? How courteous they are? What's their body language like? And these three pillars, safety, support, and enjoyment, when they come together, when a resident has a heightened sense of safety, support, and enjoyment, that helps to enhance the value for money perception of an apartment community. And that's where reputation currency comes in. So reputation currency is the trust and goodwill which you earn from your residents when you engage with them and perform daily acts of kindness to basically take care of these three pillars: safety, support, and enjoyment. And why this whole conversation of value for money is so important, because J. Turner Research had recently done a research where it shows that the top two reasons for non-renewal are basically moving to a less expensive apartment and moving to a better apartment. Now, how do you define it, right? What's affordable for one may not be affordable for another. So it's really this whole value for money perception, which is closely tied into safety, support, and enjoyment, which is what you need to focus on as you build your reputation currency.
I love that you started by setting the foundation, that's what people are going into it looking at. And you're right, sometimes we are so focused on that end review that we're not looking at the foundation of what it is that people are looking for. Now, you mentioned specifically two reasons for non-renewal. Is there any other unexpected things that we see that residents are not renewing for that's maybe surprising?
It should not be surprising. What I have seen and observed in a lot of these reviews, and I really don't like to call them reviews. I think first of all, we need to shift the mindset in our industry and really start treating them as stories, because these are really, for the most part, unprompted stories of residents' experiences, good and bad experiences, which they voluntarily share on different review platforms. And what I have seen, it's not that suddenly one day a resident decides that I'm not going to renew, right? The tipping point for non-renewal is usually related to financial reasons. Suddenly they've been slapped with $100, $200, $300 rent increase, or suddenly there is a new utility fee which has come in. It's usually financial, but the build up is a series of events and activities throughout the life cycle of a resident which make a resident feel unsafe, which make a resident feel unsupported, where a resident really feels, I'm not enjoying this property. So for instance, and there is continuous ignorance from the staff, or where a resident feels, again, it's a game of perceptions, right? Where a resident feels that the staff has a rude attitude, or is condescending, or is not returning phone calls or emails, or their maintenance work orders are not being addressed, or where the staff is constantly changing. So all of this eventually culminates, and that crescendo moment is when they are slapped with the rent increase. So it really shouldn't come to us as a surprise in the multifamily industry that the biggest reason for non-renewal is the culmination of all of these events, which make a resident question the value for money of an apartment. And this question becomes even more kind of pressing when they have the sudden rent increase.
So what you're saying is it's the sum of every interaction. It's not one isolated. And does that go both ways? Because I think sometimes, we see huge incentives to move in, great, really fun, expensive things, or really great resident events here and there. But what it sounds like to me is it's not one of those things, positive or negative. It's like the culmination of all of them, and then being able to weigh out, was it more good or was it more, frustrating than anything?
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. What we have to remember is that, a resident is, we have to look at the entire life cycle of a resident. And in the mind of a resident, every day is very important. So the daily actions of your property teams, right? How they are communicating, how they are resolving their issues, how clean the property is, all of that really kind of leaves a lasting impression on the resident's mind. And that impression really comes to forefront when it comes to lease renewal, when it's time for lease renewal.
That's so true, because I think about even myself when I'm up for renewal on any kind of a service, immediately you kind of filter the high points, good or bad, and you start to think like, how does this product or service make me feel? And that impacts the decision making. Is there any correlation? I'm just curious about when an interaction happens. So for example, like let's say something happens negative or positive closer to the lease expiration. Does the timing of that also matter?
The timing matters. It matters even more today because again, we've done research which shows that residents actually, start evaluating and looking into other properties 6 months into their lease.
Okay.
So if you are thinking, if property teams are thinking, oh, this resident has just come in, it's just been 6 months, let me give it some time, you're actually wrong because those impressions are forming, those memories are getting stored, those high points and low points are getting registered. So you really can't wait for the last 3 months or 6 months, whatever your cycle is, where you're about to send that renewal notice to get into action and resolve a resident's grievances. You really have to act right from the beginning.
Great. I love that answer. So now we know that we live in this age where the digital landscape relies a lot on these reviews, which I am with you. I like the idea of these stories, these resident stories. Can you share what the real impact of resident reviews are on the lease terms and retention terms?
I think I cannot emphasize the impact these stories are having on lease terms and retention terms because, so again, let me give a context here. I feel that our marketing teams are working really hard to get the footfall, get people in the door, and they paint this really nice picture of all the conveniences and the luxuries and everything an apartment community offers. But once somebody signs the lease and moves in, that's where your operations and training comes into effect because that's when a resident is really evaluating on a daily basis what's going right, what's going wrong at that property, and what's going right and what's going wrong is actually being expressed in those online reviews. So if you're really reading those reviews, you can make it's a huge, it can unleash a huge cash flow if all you need to do is you need to read, absorb, analyze, and engage with those stories to really identify what are your operational challenges on a day-to-day basis. Let me give you an example. With a company, I saw a series of reviews where the residents were talking about how there's always a revolving door with the staff, right? So whenever they go to the property office for any kind of answers, the left doesn't know what right is doing and the right doesn't know what left is doing. So if the company is smart, if the property and the company, they are smart enough, they are reading these reviews, they know immediately that training needs to be beefed up for all of these staff members, right? Everybody needs to have the best knowledge about the policies and processes because all of this will eventually impact the lease renewal. As I've been saying, lease renewal is not one event, it's a combination of events. So reviews can have a huge impact on lease retention and getting in those closures. You just have to make it work in your favor.
Well, and what I'm hearing is kind of exciting because for those of us that maybe are like scared of reviews, what you're sharing is saying, no, dig into them. The answers are really there. The opportunities are there. I think about if you're taking over management a lot of times and you don't know what's really been going on, read the reviews. And yes, there might be some skewed to really angry ones, but you can kind of get an average feel for what's actually happening if the sentiment is the same over and over again.
Absolutely. I think, as I said, I think the number one thing is you really need to look at these reviews as genuine experiences, right? For the most part. Now, I understand there are review generation tools and everything, but for the most part, these are genuine experiences. And there is no better way to really get into the mindset of a resident, right? There is no deeper first-hand account of what is it like to live at an apartment community than reviews.
Yeah. Yeah. And on the flip side, because I am in marketing, I think that when you have the good reviews, you almost can verbatim use some of that wording to use wording back that residents are using to sell the lifestyle if you're doing a great job. Like, to me, they can be such a wealth of information for whether you need to reposition or you need to hunker down and keep doing what is actually working.
Absolutely. I think it's a huge plus even for the marketing teams, as you rightly said, because they can find those phrases and those sentences which describe the true living experience, right? And that's the proof in the pudding, right? That's your proof in the pudding right there about what is it like to live at this apartment community.
Priyanka, I love that at the last conference you shared some back to basics approach about how to positively influence reviews. And I want to rephrase now my wording because it's really how to positively influence the stories and the experiences of residents that then would motivate them to write these experiences online. So I know that today we cannot cover every single one because I think you had like 10 different ones, but can you share a few more of them or a few of those with our audience today?
Absolutely. And, Barbara, you really got me talking because I'm very, very passionate about this.
I love it.
I just love it. I've looked at more than 1 million reviews. So what I like to do is I really like to curate and look at the genuine positive reviews. And I've been trying to identify themes which really drive residents to share those memorable and those appreciative experiences, right? What really drives residents to leave a compliment for your property or leave a specific compliment for a staff member? And before I share examples, I want to share that there is one common theme. It is not rocket science. You do not need $1 million budget. You don't have to be a class A, class B, or an affordable housing property. The common theme is customer service 101. You have to be caring, you have to be empathetic, you have to be compassionate, you have to learn to walk in a resident's shoes, right? You have to have very good communication skills. It's really, really the basics of customer service. And I'll share a few examples with you. The first thing which comes to my mind is what I've seen in a lot of reviews. Compassion is the number one theme which really genuinely drives a resident to leave you a 5-star review. I've seen so many experiences, so many stories where residents will say how the property teams made them feel better when their pet passed away or a family member passed away. And it's a very inexpensive gesture. Send an email, leave a note card. Or there was this one instance I remember where the property manager was telling me how the property was a student housing property, and the mother called because her child was unwell. So the concierge team really went out of their way to check on the student and then report back to the mother that everything is okay. So in today's, or there was another review which spoke about where the resident spoke about how, and I think she was probably an elderly resident who recently had a knee replacement, and how the teams really helped in the grocery delivery and helped her, just settle down and even kind of reinstalled a toilet for her, right? So there are all kinds. There was another review which spoke about how a mother wrote this review. She felt really nice because her daughter just graduated from high school and the team were thoughtful enough to just leave a balloon at the door. So, the point is, and this is something I have noticed over the years, especially after COVID, the need for compassion and the need for care and the need for kindness has really, really kind of gone high. It's sky high. So if the property teams just bring about this change of attitude where they start, being more caring, more compassionate, and more empathetic, just like a smile, just like a simple, to sit down and listen can go really a long way in getting you that positive review or a compliment.
That's really exciting to hear, because normally when we go to conferences, we're being pitched these ideas that are very expensive. And right now, I love a back to basics moment where it's like just being kind to people. And I think that you hit the nail on the head. The more rare something has become, and unfortunately, kindness has become very rare, people now notice when you're kind. And so, sometimes you'll have somebody maybe say, "Oh, you're always so smiling," or "You always make me feel good." And it's because if they're not getting a lot of that in their life, you're going to stand out as different. So to me, that's exciting that teams could just say, okay, we can slow down a little bit and say one resident at a time, how can we make their day today? Just with something free, a smile, a hello, how was your kid's graduation, or how was your weekend?
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head again. And I think when teams do this on a consistent basis, right, don't treat reputation management as an end goal. It's really a journey that never ends, right? You're constantly at it. You have to maintain, it's like being on an elliptical or a treadmill and maintaining a consistent pace of, doing these acts of kindness to support to really make a resident feel safe, supported, and give them an enjoyable experience, which really goes a long way. And another big benefit when you do all of this, you also kind of take away a lot of weeds, in the sense that many a times I'll see a lot of reviews, right, where the resident feels threatened, or the resident feels discriminated against, or it's simply because of the body language, or just the lack of politeness, or even lack of a smile. So, you kind of are automatically filtering out all of these negative experiences by just bringing about a little bit of proactivity in your attitude.
Yes. And checking the attitude, right?
Yes.
Sometimes I know for our teams, I was an on-site manager for years. Like sometimes my face would just be so tired because I was frustrated, have a bad day. And it is almost a practice to say, okay, I have to find little times in the day to reset so that I'm ready for the next person, and they're not inheriting the stress of my last hour. It's a very intense job that our on-site teams have, but I love the fact that it's per individual, and it's their experience is their unique experience. So like you've said, it's not, I think my favorite thing I want to put a pin on that you said, we're not going after this as an end check off. There's not this is a forever thing that is building this momentum. And I think about currency, it's like the more money that you're putting in the bank, it's like building that equity with your residents.
Exactly. And I think it's very important for us to kind of rewire and reset ourselves and focus on reputation currency, because the biggest advantage of having a huge stash of this currency is that your residents are going to be much more forgiving when something goes wrong. Now, at the end of the day, this is a very, as you said, it's a very people-oriented industry, right? We're all humans. There could be a slip up here or there. But when you have earned that trust and goodwill of your resident, right, when the resident is confident that you will be there to support them and help them, if there is an occasional slip up, they are not going to go immediately online to leave you a negative review. So the higher the reputation currency you have, the fewer the negative reviews. So it's like, you are going to achieve something really big in the long term, but you have to work towards it. You have to work towards it on a daily basis.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that if somebody then has a mishap, which is going to happen, you order parts for a sink and they don't come in as expected, your team miscommunicates, and the move-in isn't ready. I mean, things that can be very frustrating. But it sounds like if you have built up this currency, then doing that allows you to cash in on it without an immediate negative review.
Exactly. And then, another point about when things really don't go as planned, right? One of the ways to build this reputation currency in those situations is that you have to train your teams to be flexible. There should always be a plan B, right? Say, for instance, if somebody is moving out of state, right? They're coming with this big U-Haul with, all their stuff loaded up. There may be traffic delays. So if somebody has to come in at 4, they may not be able to come in at 4. right? So what are you going to do to accommodate that new resident when that resident comes in at 5 o'clock?
Right.
One of my favorite examples is I read this review from a prospective resident. It was a 5-star review where she's talking about how she went to tour an apartment community with her family. And I think her child was pretty young and her child had a meltdown. So she said how the leasing agent was very accommodated, very kind, very understanding, didn't kind of shoo her away and try to calm the kid down and continue with the tour. So it's about being flexible. It's about being accommodative. You need to have a follow through. You need to make sure that when something hasn't gone as planned and the resident is expecting something, you reach out to the resident, you kind of explain the situation, do whatever you can, and then close the loop. If you have told them that you will get back with a particular piece of information, or you're going to try and see, you need to contact corporate for something, make sure to follow through. And when you do all of this, right, all of these kind of traits or skill sets will really come in handy in helping you deal with unexpected life situations, unexpected situations in multifamily.
And it's so true that it's unexpected, but it happens all the time. So it's like prepare for the unexpected, because literally most of the time in multifamily, it doesn't go as planned.
Oh, exactly. And then, especially we're living in today's day and age where there are so many, with climate change, you never know which way things will go, right? So you just have to be prepared. You just have to be conscientious. And something which I haven't spoken about earlier extensively, another thing I would like to mention, I think it's very important for property teams to be very conscious of the general rhetoric in the society. What is making news? What is trending? Because let me tell you, and I have seen it, I've been doing this for almost 8 years. As I said, I've looked at 1 million reviews. Whenever there is something trending in the general society, it will find its way in reviews.
Really?
So, yes. So, for instance, when the Black Lives Matter movement was at its peak, right? So there were so many reviews where residents were expressing their feelings of being discriminated against, and everything was linked to the BLM movement. Or when say for instance, off late, unfortunately, there's been so much of gun violence in the country, right? So whenever there is some kind of an incident, or even off late, I've seen a lot of reviews where properties have heard gunshot sounds in the neighboring area. So immediately, residents start questioning the safety of the apartment community, even though nothing has happened within the apartment community, right? So you really need to be tuned into what's going on in the larger society, locally, in your neighborhood. All of this, when you absorb all of this, when you strategically figure out what are you going to do if something like this, or if questions regarding a particular incident come up in your community, when you're prepared with all of this, again, you are supporting your residents, right? And then eventually you're building your reputation currency, because you're not leaving them in the lurch, and you're not leaving them at a point where they are going to feel confused. They're not getting the right information, and they're like, okay, what the hell? I'm going to leave you a negative review.
Exactly. I've seen this even happen where communities pre-schedule social media, which I think is okay. But if something is going on and you're not sensitive to what the message is, it can come across as if you just don't care, or you're tone deaf to the situation. And something we talk about with marketing all the time is make sure that anything you have on automation is not going to blow up in your face when something changes in the like you were saying, in the environment, the way that things are going. And so we have to be sensitive, even if it's not something that's affecting us personally. We have to, like you said, walk in the shoes of someone and say, they might be a little more sensitive during this time, and rightly so. How can I show myself empathetic? And I think sometimes people feel like, oh, I don't have to, that's not my job. But it's like, this conversation I love, because in an age of AI, we're talking about being human. And that's like what's never going to change for us. It's like what connects all of us.
And it couldn't be more true. I think the more I think about it, and this is something I had recently kind of said, there is no other industry which is as emotionally charged as ours, right? you're dealing with people's homes, right? This is where this is where they are building and nurturing and raising a family. So anywhere where the emotions are so high, you have to be very conscious of all conversations. And you brought in a great point about automation, and that's another thing I wanted to mention, that there is so much. I feel we are almost on this kind of, there's a marathon and there is a race going on to be like, the first technology adopter and jump onto be the first one to say, oh yeah, we got this technology on board, or centralization or automation or whatever. But what you have to make sure as a management company, you need to have enough checks and balances in place to make sure what is the impact of it on your residents. What's the impact of it on your team members? Like, I'll give you an example. Again, I read a review where this resident was saying, the prospective resident was talking about how she's been trying to get in touch with her property for about 2 weeks. And apparently, how the number listed on Google, she was calling that number, it was going to voicemail, she was not getting any answer. And, as part of our process, when I contacted and unfortunately, that property was also being trolled. So when I contacted the property teams for more information, they told me, oh, can you just let them know that they were dealing with our AI assistant, but now they're being transferred to a leasing agent and somebody's going to get in touch with them. I said, absolutely not. Because, they've already lost all trust and confidence. And by saying this, whatever little glimmer of hope, there is for them to consider you, you're completely squishing it, right? Because they're going to be like, if right at the beginning they are not caring about me, and everything is based on an AI assistant, what is going to happen in the future? Exactly. So the point is, embrace technology. I mean, technology is great. It is. In fact, the reason why we're having this podcast is thanks to technology, right? But at the end of the day, be very careful about the checks and balances you put in place to really measure and evaluate the impact on residents and your team members.
That's a great point. You don't want to sacrifice that for then having a bigger capacity. So if it's going to end up leaving a bad taste that you're then having to overcome, it kind of negates any capacity gains that you've gained. So I think that's a great way to look at it. I'm curious, you mentioned a couple of times safety, and I know from like my old school days of being in the apartment industry, we're always very nervous about promising safety. In the presentation, I remember that you shared some ways to visually show safety without having to say safety. Could we talk about that?
Absolutely. So again, Jitana keeps doing, we're a research company and we love digging into the mindset of residents. And what we found out was that it is actually a myth that safety, the perception of safety is only related to like a crime or some kind of an untoward incident. The perception of safety is also very highly correlated with how well maintained your property is. Are the lights in the hallways working? Is your trash chute overflowing? Do you have weeds as you enter your apartment community? If you are close to some kind of a homeless hub, how are you protecting your apartment community? So it's all about what property teams can do to enhance the perception of safety without saying that this is a very safe community. Just simple things, right? Make sure that your hallways are well lit. Make sure that your parking lots are well lit. Make sure that the trash is picked up, cleaned on time. Make sure that there is no dog urine and dog feces everywhere. Again, as I mentioned, because of climate change, there are so many natural disasters, right? Make sure that you have a team in place or contractors in place to come in, do the necessary cleanup after a climate event. Have a courtesy patrol officer on site, particularly if you live in a more sensitive area. So a lot, and this is again, safety is one of the core building blocks of a home, as I've been talking about. So it's really not about living in a zero crime zone. It's about how well you take care of your property to give the resident a sense that yes, these people are going to take care of me because they take care of their property.
Yes, I think that's so wonderful. And Priyanka, you even talked about like how from a visual perspective, like, and I think about the marketing of things too, is you were just in an area that was hit by bad weather where things are down, and I know there's communities probably in there. If you show your teams clearing limbs and cleaning up things and you post those pictures, our team's hard at work to make sure your entry and exit is easy in and out, you're not saying it's safe, but you're showing it. And I think that sometimes, from a marketing perspective, if I'm looking at a property to rent from, I'm going to go back and look at their social media for a while and see. And if I see that last winter they were clearing snow and this, they're doing this, nobody has to tell me it's safe. It's just being shown to me that these are the kind of people I want to align my home with.
Absolutely. And I'll give you, and I've just experienced this. My neighborhood was hit by a tornado. And, I think this happened Thursday evening. By Friday morning, all the limbs, all the branches, everything was moved away from the road, right? Everything was moved on the sidewalk. So if I'm a prospective homeowner looking to move into this apartment community, and when I drive around, it gives me the impression that, wow, people living in this neighborhood, they really care. They really care about each other's safety. We try to remove, big limbs, which could hurt somebody while walking their dogs or whatever. So, at the end of the day, I think what we multifamily have to really remember, it is a game of perceptions. The marketing team can do its best to create a great perception, but really the operations, from an operational perspective, these resident stories really tell you the truth. That's a proof in the pudding, right? What's going wrong, what's going right. And when you keep tracking this, when you keep engaging with this, you can really proactively fix things which maybe need alignment. And once you do that, then that's when really marketing and operations are going to be aligned with each other.
And then you're not tricking anybody. It's literally what it is. And you're showcasing that. So I think that's so cool. And I want to have one more question, and then I want to open it up if there's anything we haven't covered that you want to talk about. But we do face those situations where you get the bad reviews. Sometimes you get the people that are just vindictive and they're just going after a community. Are there any best practices of how a community should approach a situation like that you've seen?
Sure. The number one thing I tell all the property teams is, when you see a negative review, it's not the speed of the response, particularly online. It is how proactive you are in first reaching out to the resident directly. So you should really don't worry about what is being posted online. The first step really should be to reach out to the resident, to understand what their problem is, to investigate and offer them a resolution. And I can tell you, off late, I've seen a lot of instances where, and this happened, in fact, just this morning, it was a new resident who had just kind of signed in the lease and everything. And unfortunately, that didn't go very smoothly. And she had some questions and confusion about the additional charges, which weren't properly addressed. And she left a negative review. But immediately, the property team sprung into action, contacted her, clarified everything. And guess what? She's upgraded her review from a 1-star to a 5-star review. The only catch there is that she has written that she is going to report back about her move-in and her living experience. So if the property team is smart enough, they need to follow through and they need to make sure that, they kind of map this resident throughout the life cycle and make sure that she is having a good experience. So really, it's all about, you can prevent those negative situations. You just have to be perceptive. You have to communicate with the resident. But I also get it. And there are countless times I have seen situations where, as you said, a resident just is out to be vindictive, right? I mean, they are just extremely obnoxious. In those cases, there are lots of, there are certain kind of policies, certain processes in place. You can flag the review on the review side, specifically on Google. You can reach out to the Google community. You could, in some cases, I have advised clients to even involve their legal team, because a resident can become so vindictive that they will ask multiple people to leave fake reviews. So yes, there are cases where I completely get it. We try to be as reasonable and accommodative, but sometimes the other party is not. And in those cases, yes, we have to kind of either take legal action and, report everything on the review side and really hope and pray that the review side removes the review. That's one strategy. And the other strategy I always advise clients is, once you've done your investigation and found out what exactly happened in a negative situation, number one, keep your emotions aside, right? You don't want to wash your dirty linen in public. If the review is not removed for whatever reason, you should draft a very strategically tactful response, which is publicly appropriate without getting into the weeds. But you also want to just kind of set the record straight very politely and courteously, because what we have to remember is that it is not just the resident who left the review who's reading the response. It's your prospective residents who are researching, who are reading these reviews, who are reading these responses. So, in either case, you should prepare and draft a very tactful response, basis facts, without really getting into the nitty-gritties.
So this is so great, because I would have thought that the review immediately addressing it online for optics would have been the answer. But now that you've shared with me, it makes so much sense, because you're almost giving opportunity for that person to change their mind, remove it themselves, which would be the ideal. And then I do love the second piece, which is, yes, then go ahead and craft it in a way, because you're right, from a prospect perspective, I've looked at a lot of reviews myself. You can usually tell which ones where someone's just being ugly. And there's sometimes where a manager will write such a beautiful response where you're like, that was so cool and calm and collected, but it didn't miss the mark. And you just think to yourself, that even tells you, like, I like the way this person thinks. I like the way they address conflict. So I see that as a win-win.
Absolutely. And my favorite thing to tell everybody is, I love Kung Fu Panda. My son loves Kung Fu Panda. You just have to be like Master Shifu, just like practice inner peace, take a deep breath, and try and keep your emotions really aside and think about the situation objectively. And as you rightly said, when you write a response which is cool, calm, and collected, people can see through a lot of, at the end of the day, we humans, we are not, yes, we are emotional, but we also are very smart enough to filter out unnecessary emotions, right? We are very objective at the end of the day. So when people are reading these rants and these emotional outbursts, and when they see a cool, calm, collected response, they get assured that yes, there is obviously some underlying theme here, and it's a he said, she said kind of a situation. So they tend to kind of give you the benefit of the doubt.
Yes. We could talk forever, because I feel like we're so on this great ping pong, but I want to, as we wrap up, give you an opportunity. Is there any tip, any takeaway that we didn't talk about that you want to leave the audience with?
I think, what I would like to again say is, start really looking at these reviews as stories. Read these stories. I know we spoke about a lot of negative situations, but on the positive front, when you read your 4 and 5 star positive stories, right, you can really identify those aha moments. What's really grooving with your resident, right? What's making your resident happy? Say, for instance, you maybe have introduced a new policy where you want to send handwritten birthday cards to your residents, right? And if you see more and more people acknowledging it in the reviews, it's working. Or if you see like a staff member is constantly always being praised or getting a shout out for her attitude, then maybe you can use her as a role model to train your other staff members, or even use her or him, to really train, to diffuse a very conflicting situation with a resident. So there is so much of wealth of information, right? So many tips which are there in these stories. All you need to do is you just need to spend time reading and analyzing.
That's a great takeaway for a final, way that people can use these stories to amplify what is already working and double down. Priyanka, this has been such a great conversation. I know that when people listen, they're gonna be like me at the social media. I'm like, I want more of you. So how can people connect with you?
Barbara, thank you. First of all, I have really, really enjoyed having this conversation. And, you've asked some really kind of thought-provoking questions as well. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think the best way to connect with me would be through LinkedIn. You could also email me at priyanka@jturnerresearch.com, and I'll be happy to get into a deeper conversation regarding this subject.
That's wonderful. And I'll make sure that in our show notes and in the corresponding blog that all our friends and listeners can connect with you and have all the links there. We'll share a little bit more about the nonprofit that you're involved in with your son. I think that is just such a neat thing. And again, I just want to thank you for sharing your expertise. And I think we're going to have to probably do a part 2.
Let's do a part 2 on, I'll come up with, I would love to probably at some point also, because I feel very passionate about cultural sensitization. Yeah. Okay, and that's, I feel, a topic which is, though we all talk about DEI and everything in our industry, I don't think we are doing it. I don't think we are practically kind of really implementing it at a grassroots level to really sensitize our staff to different cultures. Maybe at some point we could talk about that as well.
I love that. Well, you guys hear it here first. This is a to be continued conversation. Thank you so much, Priyanka, and we'll do this again soon.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you.
So what did you guys think? I loved her energy and her practical tips. I think one of my favorite things that I highlighted in the episode when she said it, I had to stop, was how this is not an end destination. It's not like a checkbox. Like sometimes with certain things we can say, okay, send out my renewal notices. Okay, did this. But this, what we're building with our reputation currency is this we're doing it every day, day in and day out. And it's building that currency. And this currency gets more valuable the more and more efforts that we put in. And what's so cool, it's a bank account that every single person on our team can add to. And then we occasionally have to draw from it when things go wrong. But what an empowering session to realize what an impact we can have just by being kind human beings, by taking a personal interest in others, and to show that we really care. And guys, that's part of the reason that I love this industry and I love doing this podcast, because at the end of the day, I don't care how much AI and how much technology advances, you'll never replace that human connection. You'll never replace you. And I think that's so special. So go out there and do that thing that only you can do and make an impact, not only with your team, but to all of your residents, one resident at a time. All right, guys, that's a wrap on today's multifamily mix. Keep shaking things up at your community, your career, and most importantly, your life. Until we mix and mingle again, see you next week, friend.